What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. It is Friday, July 5th, 2024, and I'm your host, Max Torres with ScoopDuck on 3, coming to you from Long Beach, California. Got an awesome episode of the podcast in store for you guys today. Like I mentioned, it is Friday as we record this, but I think I'm going to roll it out on Saturday for you guys with plenty of recruiting talk with my guy, Mick Walker, recruiting insider over at Lettermen Row, the Ohio State Oregon site. Mick, how you doing, man? Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, Max. It's been fun to kind of go on this journey together. We did a little bit of our training coming on board together. We met each other in Nashville last month, so it's been fun to kind of get to know you throughout this process, and excited to finally get on because we've been talking about doing this podcast for I guess a month now.
Absolutely. Well, it's going to be a lot of great talk today. I did something just like this not too long ago with Justin Wells over at Inside Texas in Oregon and Texas recruiting overlap. And now we're going to do the same thing, but with Ohio State, because Oregon and Ohio State are going to find themselves going head to head in a number of recruiting battles for years to come, moving forward and heading into the Big Ten for Oregon here. And maybe I could just start it off with this, Mick. I know you and I, like you mentioned just there a second ago, we kind of came over around the same time. But for people who maybe don't know, just tell us a little bit about what it's like covering the Ohio State beat, maybe more specific to recruiting if you want. But I know you do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, Ohio State's an interesting beat to cover, and it's similar to more so like Alabama than it is a lot of the other beats. Then obviously you and I know the beats where their access is a little bit different and a little bit more vast. Whether it's being able to interview guys after visits and whatnot. And Ohio State's pretty guarded, pretty tight when it comes to all that. We're lucky enough we get to go to some camps and get to be at different events, but overall we are it's pretty guarded, so you kind of have to be able to figure some stuff out. And yeah, obviously it's the same as every other recruiting analyst. It's just being able to have sources and do that type of information. But it's fun. It's enjoyable. It's probably the largest college football beat in the country, so it's fun to have that competitive nature. I think Matt and I and then Alex as well do a great job at Lettermen Row. So I'm blessed to be on a good team, but it's just I enjoy it. It's what I grew up kind of following. So to be able to kind of do it in my own perspective now is fun. So that's why kind of my perspective on it.
Very cool. All right. Yeah, I haven't had too much experience with Ohio State, but I did get to take my first ever trip out to Ohio, specifically to Columbus for that 2021 Oregon versus Ohio State game. And that was probably one of the very best college football atmospheres I have ever been in at the shoe. So hopefully we'll be running into each other a bit more moving forward. And Mick, I wanted to kind of start off here getting some of your thoughts as we get into the show. Let's talk a little bit about Decorian Moore, because he is the big talk of the Oregon football community now after he announced his commitment on the 4th of July. That one pretty much came down to Oregon versus Texas for what everyone's saying and what I'm aware of. But Ohio State was in there, so I did just want to kind of get some of your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, like you said, Ohio State was in there. They got him on campus once, a couple times this spring. Once with his mom, once with his wide receiver trainer, and then again for an official. So 3 times total this offseason. And I think at different times there was some confidence in Ohio State. I think that with how Ohio State has recruited the wide receiver position, there's always a little bit of innate confidence in there because they can do so well. But I don't think they were able to kind of overpower having the connect. I've said it all along, and Matt and I talked about it. I think Ohio State was the one school that had a good pitch to Decorian Moore, but they didn't really have a clear connection. I think Oregon, with the coaching staff, ties to Texas, and specifically with Rashad Samples and the ties he has to the Duncanville program, I think that gave them a very clear in to Decorian and his mom inside that recruitment. And obviously Texas having recruited Duncanville well and being in state. Those are the 2 programs that had a direct kind of tie to Decorian. And I think without Ohio State not having one of those, it made it a little bit more difficult. And then, I mean, if we get into dollars and cents here, I imagine NIL comes up a good bit. And I think Ohio State is obviously has somewhat of an expensive wide receiver room with the guys they have in it. So I imagine there's a accountability and Moneyball type approach with figuring out, hey, who can we take? Who can we go after? And I think with Oregon, you look at kind of who they have and who they got bringing in, who they have coming out. There's obviously a clear path for Decorian to slide in. If you lose the Evan Stewarts and the Tez Johnsons and some of those guys going out, clear avenue for Decorian to come in, have a spot when it comes to everything on and off the field and kind of fit in. So obviously big pickup. I thought the commitment was cool. I didn't tune in live, got to see it after. I heard it was really long, but I thought it was cool to watch afterwards. So big win for Oregon. Congrats to Dan Lanning and some of the coaching staff over there.
It was certainly a crazy commitment to cover. I was actually on my phone hanging out at the park with my friends, waiting for that one to go down, and we thought it was going to be an hour earlier than it was, and then the time came, and then it took like a half hour. So I was battling service issues again somehow, but it was certainly a commitment that had a lot of flair to it, with fireworks or the smoke bomb that was green. It was really cool, but. DeCorian Moore does definitely feel like he has NFL potential written all over him, more so maybe than some of the other receivers that we've seen come through Oregon, specifically through the high school ranks in recent years. And that's something that Ohio State has done tremendously well, producing NFL wide receivers. So given the clip that they're operating at, and then how well Brian Hartline's doing at that position, Mick, just tell me a bit about recruiting the wide receiver position at Ohio State, because it seems like it's just on a completely different level, maybe compared to some of the other spots.
Yeah, and like I said, we're lucky enough to get to see these camps in the summer where Ohio State hosts a handful of them, and we get to see coaching in person and kind of get a feel for how these guys coach. And I think that's a big thing with Brian Hartline is I believe that a lot of people would think Brian Hartline is a guy that just offers a lot of money or is very coddling and trying to be best friends with the guys, but he's very hard on him. He has a very clear standard of wide receiver play with the guys that they've sent to the NFL, so that allows him to kind of be selective, approach things in a different way with a different mindset. That's why they've recruited at the level they have. That's why they're going to continue. I mean, they miss out on DeCorian Moore, but you don't get you get Jeremiah Smith, the number one wide receiver in 2024. You don't get DeCorian Moore, the number one wide receiver in 2025 because he's going to Oregon. But then in 2026, you have Chris Henry Jr. at Mater Dei, who Oregon is also trying to flip from Ohio State at this point, but he's committed to Ohio State, played some high school ball in Cincinnati. Now he's out on the West Coast. So they have a very clear kind of vision with what they're trying to do. They like bigger body guys, but they also like guys that just kind of separate and create separation. And I think that's something Brian Hartline prioritizes. I think it's something he's done well in finding guys that do that well and then seeing them rise up the ranks. But yeah, the wide receiver recruiting, it's special to watch because, I mean, it's a run that very few programs at a specific position I've ever really been on.
It really feels like Ohio State has that tag wide receiver U more strongly than any other program in the country. But of course, Oregon's doing their best to try to get the best wide receiver talent they possibly can. And then Troy Franklin, the best wide receiver in program history. I think that's kind of something that I'm getting more and more comfortable with saying now, because I haven't covered this beat crazy long. 6 years is a decent amount, but to be saying a claim that big is pretty wild. And I was glad to get a front row seat to cover him during his time at Oregon when I was living in Eugene, and then these past couple of seasons. Mick, let's shift it a little bit now and talk about one of the very best prospects in the state of Ohio, someone that I know you covered very closely, Justin Hill, the Cincinnati Winton Woods edge, announced his commitment just a couple of days ago. That one kind of came down to Oregon, Ohio State, and Alabama. USC was kind of in there at the end, but I didn't really view them myself as a very serious contender. So tell me what you can about Justin Hill, what it was like covering that recruitment. And then, of course, we have to talk about the end result with him choosing Kalen DeBoer and the Crimson Tide.
Yeah, I mean, Justin, before we really get into the recruitment, Justin's a great kid. I think he made a good decision for himself, for his family. There's some Alabama fandom inside his family that I think played a role in it down into the end. But I think the biggest thing was kind of just Justin's been very meticulous and very thorough throughout this process about finding guys and finding a place where he's going to be able to fit kind of this hybrid role, like a 3-4 outside linebacker almost, where he can play as linebacker and rush off the edge. Alabama allows them to do that with their wolf position. They were able to show them that in spring ball tape. They've played that type of position under Nick Saban, so you have game tape as well you can go back on. That's something Ohio State didn't have. They wanted to play in this jack position that they're trying to develop. They have no film of it. They have no real history of playing it, and they're just trying to say that he's the perfect jack, and they're going to go play him in it. Don't think that works very well, so that's I think that's part of the reason why you go to Oregon or why you went to Alabama. I think the other thing, when you're talking about specifically with Oregon in that, I think Oregon was very honest with them, I believe. And I think whether it was you or Justin or even Steve, I think multiple of you guys have reported on this. I think Oregon was very clear about, hey, we want to play you as a linebacker. Like, we want to play you as kind of like Quay Walker, how Quay Walker played at Georgia under Dan Lanning. And whether that was not playing as much on the edge or just blitzing him more as an off-ball linebacker, I think Oregon was very clear with Justin about that. I don't know if that was Justin's favorite plan for him at the college level, but I think they were honest with him about it, and he appreciated that. I also think, obviously, as you guys know, and as your readers and listeners know, the distance from a lot of these guys can become difficult at times. And I think as he kind of went on all four of these officials, being the fourth, and how long some of these officials can be, and how busy they are, I think that kind of weighed on him. It probably didn't give Oregon the best shot being the fourth there, because it just got for a long process for him. Talking to him towards the end of it, it just felt like it wore on him a little bit, and maybe Oregon being the fourth wasn't to their benefit in this specific recruitment.
Which is an interesting point to look at, Mick, with the timing of all of it, because I think that with the way these guys set their schedules, they're so busy. It's tough on the family. It's tough on them. It's tough on the coaches. So I think that does play into it to a degree. I know everyone kind of wants, or at least the perception is that it's always a benefit to get the last official visit, but I'm not sure that's entirely the case all the time. But just to peel back the curtain a little bit, as far as my perspective on this recruitment, this was, like you were saying, a guy that Oregon was recruiting maybe a bit more traditionally at that linebacker spot, that true linebacker spot, versus a guy who comes off the edge. I know that there was a plan in the cards to have him blitz a lot and come off the edge. They were really playing up that blitz doctor angle with Brian Michalowski, the new linebackers coach at Oregon, and that trio of him, Tosh Lapoy, Dan Lanning. So I don't know if this is a guy that they're maybe going to try to stay in the picture with in the long term. I mean, I don't see why you wouldn't, especially given my understanding of how focused that linebacker board is for the Ducks. You had Justin Hill, Noah McHale, Gavin Nix, and Keelan Moses. So all four of their top guys, for my money, I would say, are committed to other programs right now. But I think the Ducks do lead for Keelan Moses, but it's going to be a really difficult pull because he's over, obviously, in Baton Rouge at University Lab, which is basically right by LSU. So the other thing I would add here, Mick, is that Justin did seem like a guy that Oregon had a pretty good shot with earlier on, months ago, when I first got to interview him. But over the last month or so, for whatever it's worth, I don't know if this is something you experience. It was getting harder and harder to get a response from him. I couldn't get an interview. Sometimes, not all the time, and maybe not even specifically here, but sometimes if you're having a difficult time getting a hold of a recruit and you cover Ohio State or I cover Oregon, maybe sometimes that's indicative of kind of where they're at, how much they want their name, associated or linked to a school. I'm not saying that played a role here, but just thought it was a detail worth sharing as far as my end covering that recruitment.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I planned to talk to Justin before his commitment. We never got anything lined up, so that probably lends a little credence to your point, like you just said. I think going back to the official visit thing too, it's you talk to some of these guys, and like you said, they take four of them, and they're a packed 48 hours of visits. I mean, you get in late, you get in probably mid-afternoon, late evening that Friday, and then you're up early doing a whole day until late on night on Saturday. You wake up early on Sunday, get breakfast, meet with the coach. So doing that for 4 straight weekends, how busy you are, I think that probably does play a factor in it. When it comes to Justin, I do think he's somebody that both Oregon and Ohio State will probably keep recruiting, just because as time wears on, maybe going away from home is something that he's not going to like, or maybe Oregon continues to have a need at the linebacker position and they have to push a little bit more aggressively. So I don't know if it's necessarily over. I think he probably feels confident in his decision, but I imagine as the season goes on, there'll probably be more of a gap there. So I'll be interested to follow how things go with Justin.
Talking with Mick Walker, a little bit of Oregon, Ohio State recruiting overlap here on the Ducks Dish podcast. Thank you guys so much for being here. Glad to have you along for today's show. Got to give a thanks to our sponsor, Ranchito Grill in Springfield. Not sure what your guys' dinner plans are, but head on over to Ranchito at 1537 Mohawk Boulevard. You got to try their homemade tortillas. They got great food, a great environment, and they will take care of you. Say what's up to my guy, Ruben, and let him know that Max Torres sent you. Mick, let's hop into another big recruitment, specifically for Ohio State, but Oregon was also heavily involved. Let's talk about North Carolina defensive lineman Trajan Odom. This one was interesting because Oregon's D-line board seemed like it was relatively small, and you had Trajan Odom and you had Josiah Sharma, and those guys actually came off the board on the very same day. Odom came off the board on Friday and announced for Ohio State, And then not far after that, not too long after that, I'm getting a phone call that Oregon looks like they're going to be getting Josiah Sharma in a recruitment that I really didn't think they were favored in. But I did kind of feel at one point that Oregon had a better shot with Odom since he's a West Coast guy originally from Inglewood. But let me know what you kind of learned about that recruitment and maybe some thoughts on Odom picking the Buckeyes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously just on the surface level. I think it's a big pickup. You talk about defensive linemen, interior defensive linemen, having elite ones is special. Having them is always important to have a vast amount of them, having a large amount of guys that you can rotate in and play with. So obviously, adding Trajan Odom is big. That somebody like you said, they were going down to the wire. Oregon, Ohio State. I think Ohio State was kind of trying to decide on how many numbers to take, how to position things. They ended up taking Trajan Odom and then taking Maxwell Roy the next day, or a couple of days, or I think about a week later or so, or somewhere in that same amount of time period. And I think that was just kind of the decision of, hey, can we take both of these guys? If we take both of them, there's still other guys. Shaquem Stewart, who is a 2026, who's been heavily mentioned to reclassify in 2025. He's somebody I think both Oregon and Ohio State are trying to figure out on. One, is he going to reclassify? And two, if he is, well, how are we going to pursue with that? I think both schools would probably continue to pursue him at a high level if he does reclassify. So I think he's somebody that we could talk about down the line again. But I think figuring out the D-line board was important for Ohio State. But getting once you get both those guys on the fold, now you kind of play with a little more house money to go get Shaquem Stewart or Malik Autry, an Auburn commit. So that's kind of the perspective, was just add Trajan Odom. Bare minimum, you have a talented guy in Trajan. And if you get the other guys, it's a bonus. But if not, you obviously have Trajan. And then you take a guy away from Oregon who they obviously wanted. And you kind of keep that scorecard clear a little bit.
And was it your take on this, Mick, that it was Oregon versus Ohio State for Trajan Odom, or do you think there's someone else that needs to be mentioned there as well?
I think like you mentioned the Inglewood connection. I think California. I think both the UCLA, USC, both of them probably had a say in this. But I think when you look at defensive line football, I know USC's defensive line coach. He worked with Aaron Donald. He has a good track record of playing of developing defensive linemen, but it's still I think that's why that you saw them lose a couple of these guys they have. There still needs to be some proof in the pudding when it comes to that product on the field. So I imagine it really did come down to Oregon and Ohio State just because of what both schools can pitch, what both schools have to offer on and off the field, and just the vision both schools have for Trajan, the player.
And the Ducks and Buckeyes have gone back and forth, or head to head, I should say, for a number of talented defensive linemen in recent years. You look at Mateo Uyunglele out of St. John Bosco. He was a guy that was very heavily linked to Ohio State as well as USC. Those were some of his other finalists in the 2023 class. And then if you look at the 21 class, you have JT Tuimoloau from Washington, and he has been nothing short of spectacular for the Buckeyes since he got over there. So Larry Johnson is clearly doing a phenomenal job in his recruitment and developing of these top players. And maybe that's a guy that we can talk about a little bit here, Mick, because when you're thinking about defensive linemen, edge rushers, or just pass rushers in general, there are very few in the college game that are doing it at the level that Larry Johnson's doing it at. I'm maybe a little bit more of a fan of Nick Bosa than I was when he was in college, now that he's playing for my San Francisco 49ers. But what do we think about Larry Johnson and just the difference he makes for the Buckeyes on the recruiting trail?
Yeah, it's been a big cycle for Larry Johnson when it comes to recruiting. You have not only do you have Trajan Odom and Maxwell Roy committed in the interior defensive line class, but then you have Zion Grady, who's an Alabama guy that was committed to Alabama under Nick Saban. You have London Merritt, who's an Atlanta guy, went down to IMG Academy, committed, and then you also have Zaire Mathis out of Imhotep in Philadelphia. All three of those guys committed on the edge. The two talented defensive linemen, and then you're still after, Damian Shanklin announces later today. I think LSU's leading there, but Ohio State could try and pull off a surprise in that one. Regardless, I imagine they'll continue to recruit Damian Shanklin and Marion Dye, two guys that in the Midwest here that they've liked for a while, and I think at one point they led for both of them. So you continue to recruit those edge players, get maybe a third or a fourth, depending on if a guy stays in the class. And then, like we mentioned, Shaquem Stewart is probably the big question mark when it comes to the whole defensive line thing, because he could be the number one overall interior defensive lineman in the 25 class. He is that in the 26 class, but if he reclassifies, that changes things. And that'll be the one that Oregon, Ohio State, USC, LSU, Georgia, all these power programs will have to then turn up the heat on here in November or December if he does decide to reclassify.
And Jakeem Stewart has been a huge name that you and I have both been tracking. I got to meet him and interview him when he was at the Elite 11. Wasn't participating in the Elite 11, but he was out in LA visiting USC. He was there for one of their camps, and he's the number one player in the 2026 class, at least according to On3, I believe. And he absolutely dominated at the Rivals 5-Star Challenge in Jacksonville, Florida, within the last week or so, and he was flashing Ohio State gloves. So I think that Oregon and Ohio State are both very heavily involved in that recruitment and will be one to watch moving forward. Yet another Oregon Ohio State recruiting overlap that we can talk about here, Mick. We can go a couple different ways with it, but obviously Carlos Lachlan is Ohio State's new running backs coach following his departure from Oregon, and the Ducks obviously brought in Rashad Samples to replace him. And Lachlan was quick to make a big impact and kind of a splash with the Buckeyes, landing commitments from running backs Isaiah West and Bo Jackson. And then we also had the Buckeyes involved with Jordan Davison out of Mater Dei, who eventually would pick the Ducks. So I'll kind of just toss that one to you wherever you want to take it. Lachlan, the 25 class, just what do you think?
Yeah, I think when Carlos Lachlan came on, the big two goals for him were to land Bo Jackson and then land Jordan Davison. Obviously, you land one of the two in June. Jordan Davison ends up going to Oregon after the official visits and everything that kind of went down. Obviously, I think you and I both know there was some stuff that kind of cooled the whole process down for Jordan there at the end, but still a big pickup for Oregon to be able to get a win over Ohio State, keep a Mater Dei guy out west. So that's a big win for them to have another running back to pair with Deer Hill. But still, Ohio State feels good about Bo Jackson. He's somebody that I think Oregon was at least interested in when Carlos Lachlan was there. I don't know Rashad Samples' contact with him after Lachlan left, but I know Oregon had some interest in Bo. Isaiah West is another guy that Lachlan was kind of keeping in touch with at Oregon. They offered him once he got in Ohio State, and now he's in the class. It comes from a program that Ohio State's recruited really well and recruited well this cycle with 2 commitments out of there in St. Joe's Prep from Isaiah West and Maxwell Roy. Both of them are committed to Ohio State. Obviously, Kyle McCord, Ohio State's quarterback last season, went to Ohio State. Marvin Harrison Jr. went there. I mean, the list kind of goes on and on about guys that have gone there and went on to have success at Ohio State.
And one of the other things I wanted to get your opinion on here, Mick, with Carlos Lachlan, he was one of the best recruiters at Oregon, and now he's in Columbus. And I know some of my listeners maybe won't want to hear this, but I'm curious to get your take. Of all the programs that he could have gone to, Ohio State feels like one that might be a slight, I don't want to say upgrade, but just, the level of prestige, the power that it carries when you're talking about college football. It's no secret. It's obvious that Ohio State is the more storied and, traditioned program, if that's even the word you want to use. But I think you kind of get what I'm looking at. What do you think about that? Because it seems like everything he's doing at Ohio State, he could have done at Oregon or vice versa. But just kind of wanted to peel back the layers there a little bit as far as just, what this move what he could accomplish at Ohio State, because he was phenomenal at Oregon.
Yeah, I think there's pluses and minuses. So obviously, Oregon has a great brand. He built up a good running back room out there. I think the other thing about Ohio State is though, it's as we talked about the official visit, it's a little bit easier at a place like Ohio State that's kind of more centrally located in the country, in the whole United States, to be able to get guys on campus, to be able to get guys from Georgia to come up and make an 8 to 9 hour car ride instead of flying 7 hours across the country. So that makes it a little bit easier for him. But still, I think there's resources and different avenues and different types of benefits that he had at Oregon that he isn't going to be able to have at Ohio State. Luckily, I think he's going to be able to, I think he's going to be able to keep both of his kids here at Ohio State, which is a big thing for him, and be able to keep his family together. But yeah, I think he's done well in recruiting at Ohio State so far. It'll be interesting to see. He had a handful of running backs, 26 running backs on campus this summer at Ohio State, guys that he's offered, and then a few guys that he offered this summer. And all of them seem to really enjoy their time working with him and learning from him. So it'll be interesting to see who they prioritize. So far, it doesn't look like we're going to enter into another Carlos Lachlan versus Oregon recruiting battle, but I imagine in 26 we'll have another one, probably starting with a guy like Jonas Williams, the quarterback in the Lincoln Way West, who visited Oregon last month. I imagine he'll visit Ohio State soon and is really one of the last blue chip quarterbacks left in the 2026 class uncommitted.
That's a great mention there, Mick. Yeah, him, and then I know that Ryder Lyons is another quarterback that Oregon's looking at. I'm not sure if Ohio State's looking at him, but why wouldn't they? He is just an absolute stud out west, and those 2026 QB dominoes are flying off the board. One more topic to get into with my guy Mick Walker of Lettermen Row, part of the On3 network, covering the Ohio State Buckeyes. Mick, you do a tremendous job covering the state of Ohio, apart from just Ohio State necessarily. I wanted to talk a little bit about Ohio State's just in-state recruiting efforts in general, because Justin Hill obviously announces for the Crimson Tide, and then it looks like all signs are pointing towards Trey McNutt out of Cleveland heading to Oregon. At least that's where he has his predictions to, right? With myself, Justin Hopkins, Steve Wiltfong, all have him predicted to Oregon. And then the other guy that we can maybe talk about a little bit, not exactly an in-state guy, but Dorian Brew, right? He's from the state of Ohio originally. All the signs seemed, at least from my perspective, to be pointing to him going to Ohio State, but he kind of pulled the rabbit out of the hat there and shocked everybody with a commitment to Oregon. So tell me about the in-state recruiting efforts and where you think the Buckeyes are there.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I think Ohio State has done what it wants to do in the state of Ohio. It's done well recruiting in the state of Ohio. Probably hasn't done exactly what it wants to do, because I imagine if you ask Ryan Day and Mark Pantoni, some of these guys that head up the actual decision-making process at Ohio State when it comes to recruiting, they would have loved to have Justin Hill in the class. They would love to already have Trey McNutt in the class, obviously. He's trending towards Oregon. I think everything is still on track for him to take an official visit to Ohio State this fall, regardless if a commitment comes to Oregon anytime soon. I've continued to say, and I continue to believe, I think if Ohio State is able to get Trey to hold off on a decision and get him on campus, I think Ohio State can win this one back, and relatively easily, because of all the connections they have to him. It just takes more time to build relationships and get to know him. The Trey's an Ohio State legacy, but I don't know if it's necessarily helping Ohio State in that recruitment. I think there's some things that he's trying to make sure that he's establishing Trey McNutt's legacy at Ohio State, not just necessarily continuing the McNutt legacy in Columbus. He's got family here. Obviously, he's very close with his siblings here. His mother's in Ohio, so I think that'll make it hard for him to leave the Cleveland area. But obviously, he's done a lot of visits. He's seen everything he can see. So it'll be interesting to see where Trey ends up. I don't think we're anywhere close to a decision on that one. I could be entirely wrong, because Trey doesn't chat all that much with the media. But I think Trey is maintaining that he wants to take it into the season and kind of take it more towards signing day to visit Ohio State and Georgia officially, and then kind of make a decision after that, after seeing those 5 or 6 top programs he has. When it comes to Dorian, I think you mentioned down an Ohio State in-state guy right now. He's a guy that loves Ohio, that I think before you and I saw him at the future at the On 3 Elite Series in Nashville, it was his birthday, and he was in the Dayton area for his birthday. And then I think prior to his official visit, he was hanging out with his mom in the Dayton area. He's in the Dayton area a lot, and I think if you're Oregon and the Oregon coaching staff, that might give you a little pause, because obviously if he comes up to visit his mom, Ohio State is then half an hour and a half away, or an hour away. So a visit's very likely, visit's very possible. He's close to Devin Sanchez, who's committed to Ohio State. He's close to Tim Lawton, who's been recruiting him. So I think of those, I think Trey McNutt is very much not over, but he's not committed to Oregon yet. I think Ohio State will out of all those 3 of those guys, when it comes to Justin Hill, Trey McNutt, and Dorian Brew, I expect Ohio State to continue recruiting all of them. And I think I can see a path to all of them ending up at Ohio State. I can also see a path to none of them ending up at Ohio State. So it'll be interesting to see how the chips fall when it comes to all 3 of them. But I would not be surprised if one of those 3 does end up at Ohio State, regardless if it's Justin, Trey, or Dorian at some point.
So I'll kind of wrap it up with this, Mick. I think I was talking to Justin Hopkins about this on one of our shows the other day. Let's just operate off of the hypothetical, right? That Dorian Brew ends up at Oregon when all is said and done. Trey McNutt ends up at Oregon when all is said and done. Justin Hill is at at Alabama. Let's just operate off of that. You have some top guys like Bo Jackson, in-state committed. Tavian St. Clair, who was phenomenal at the Elite 11. It was so fun getting to watch that guy spin it in person. What do you make of kind of where Ohio State's at with their in-state guys? Obviously, you have some tremendous players that are going to be Buckeyes when they get to the college level, but it seems like some of these other programs are starting to make some headway with regard to taking some top Ohio players. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think overall, if you talk about those 3 guys leaving the state, I think Ohio State would be disappointed in that result. I think with the guys they have committed, with the Devin Sanchez and Naeem Offer at the cornerback position, losing Dorian Brew is not an overall disappointment just at the cornerback position. Like we said with Justin Hill, it's a position they would like to play, but they've never played before in that jack spot. So that not having that is a loss. Trey McNutt, they have Fahim Delane committed, who was another guy that Ohio State was battling Oregon for at one point or another. So having that safety class committed, like losing all 3 of those guys, like you said, does not impact the class. Does not impact the class in this giant negative way. It's not a 10 times worse class, or it's not going to fall down 10 spots because you don't get them. But like you said, it's more perception. It's more showing a vulnerability of people being able to come into the state. And I think all of them are unique circumstances too. Obviously, like I said, Justin Hill having his family have some Alabama fandom in there, that plays a role in it. Trey wanting to kind of get out and see what's going on and kind of figuring out where he can go and kind of build his own brand and build his own name. And then Dorian's an interesting one too. I think his mom's an Ohio State alum, and she's in the track Hall of Fame at Ohio State. His dad's an LSU alum, and he ran in the Olympics after running at LSU. And I think going to Oregon gives Dorian a very nice ability to be able to say he's not telling either of his parents yes, and one of them yes, and one of them no. He's telling both of them no, and he's going to a third party. I imagine both those schools, LSU and OSU, will continue to recruit him until the end. But yeah, losing all three of those guys, not being able to secure these in-state guys as well, is something that won't sit well with Ryan Day when it comes to just considering in-state stuff. But the class in general, I think you can feel happy with who you have, especially if they continue to add with a guy like Riley Pettijohn, who's going to commit on Saturday, and it's down to potentially USC and Ohio State at the linebacker position. That'd be a very good rebound for James Laurinaitis, the linebackers coach, who was the lead recruiter on Justin Hill.
There you go. There you go. So I say all of that not to say by any means that Ohio State is not recruiting its home state well, but it's just an interesting development. And like you said, Mick, you can't be upset with the results. Ohio State does have that number one recruiting class in the country as of this recording, according to On3 Sports. But man, yeah, it's been great having you on, Mick. Don't want to keep you too long, but just let the people know where they can find more of your work, because I think we're going to be crossing paths quite a bit, and let us know what's going on at Lettermen Row.
Yeah, Matt Parker and I do a great job full-time covering Ohio State recruiting for Lettermen Row. Spencer Holbrook, Andy Backstrom do a great job on the team side, and I imagine you'll see more content with those guys and Justin and you when it comes to October and the game finally rolls around in Autzen Stadium. I know Spencer and Andy were talking about just last week, making sure they have their travel arrangements planned. So I know they're looking forward to get out to see Autzen Stadium, to be out there and cover that game. Like you said, me and you and Matt and Justin will all continue to communicate with recruiting, because as we said, that this 25 class, there's been a lot of battles, and I think a handful of them are already wrapped up. They'll still be ongoing through signing day, but 26, I imagine, will be no different. Chris Henry Jr. is committed to Ohio State, but he's considering Oregon. Jonas Williams is perhaps the top quarterback left on the board, and I think both schools would like to kind of maybe get him in the boat. But yeah, I mean, you can find it over at Lettermen Row. Yeah, you guys do a great job at ScoopDuck. I like going in there and reading the board. I think how you guys do everything is awesome. So hopefully, if the Ohio State fan sees this, come over and check us out at Lettermen Row. Oregon fans, hope you guys realize you guys got two of the best guys doing it, Max and Justin. And thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for the kind words, Mick, and thanks for giving us some of your time here to talk a little bit of Oregon-Ohio State overlap. But if you guys want to find more of me, you can follow me on all social media platforms at mtorres sports. Subscribe to the ScoopDuck On3 YouTube channel, and make sure to check us out over at ScoopDuck.com. You can try us out for just $1. But share the show, share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, with your family, with other Duck fans. A big thank you to Mick, and we will see you guys in the next episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.